Bruno, a retired K9 German Shepherd, lay weak and breathless. His once powerful body was failing, but his heart still longed for one thing: his owner. As his vision blurred, he let out a heartbreaking howl, a desperate call that sent chills down everyone's spine. The shelter staff watched in silence, unsure if his plea would ever be answered. Time was running out. Then, just as hope began to fade, the door creaked open. Bruno's ears twitched, his cloudy eyes widened, and in that moment, everything changed. Who had arrived? And why did everyone gasp in disbelief? What happened next was truly unimaginable. Bruno, a retired K9 German Shepherd, had spent his life serving and protecting. From chasing down criminals to sniffing out danger, he had always been fearless. His loyalty was unmatched, his instincts razor-sharp. But now, those glory days were long behind him. His once powerful legs trembled with weakness, and his deep brown eyes, once filled with determination, had turned dull with age. Bruno had been placed in a shelter after retirement. His owner, Officer Mark Reynolds, had been forced to relocate due to unforeseen circumstances, leaving Bruno behind. It was never supposed to be permanent. Mark had promised to return. But months had passed, then years, and now Bruno was just another forgotten soul in a room filled with lost animals. Yet Bruno never forgot. As he lay curled up on the cold shelter floor, his breathing shallow, a deep sorrow filled his heart. He could feel the end approaching, but he did not want to go, not without seeing Mark one last time. His body may have been failing him, but his heart still longed for the man he loved the most. Then, in the dead silence of the night, he let out a howl. It was not an ordinary howl. It was filled with longing, desperation, and a pain that pierced through the hearts of those who heard it. The shelter staff, who had grown fond of Bruno, rushed to his side. His weak frame trembled as he lifted his head toward the door, his ears twitching as if expecting someone to walk through it. "He is calling for his owner," one of the workers whispered, wiping away a tear. But there was a problem. Mark was nowhere to be found. The shelter had tried reaching out to him multiple times over the years, but there had been no response. Some believed he had moved far away, while others feared the worst, that something had happened to him. Still, Bruno howled, his broken heart refusing to accept the truth. The other dogs in the shelter grew restless, sensing the deep sorrow in their companions' cries. It was as if Bruno was holding on to his last thread of life, waiting for a miracle. The shelter staff knew they had to do something. They quickly posted Bruno's story online, hoping it would reach Mark or someone who knew him. Minutes passed, then hours. Bruno's breathing grew weaker. His eyes fluttered shut for a moment, exhaustion overwhelming him. Was this it? Would he take his final breath without the reunion he longed for? Just when hope seemed lost, a sudden noise echoed through the shelter. The front door creaked open. Bruno's ears twitched. His eyes, cloudy with age, flickered open. Then, a familiar scent filled the air. His heart, once weak, seemed to skip a beat. Someone had arrived. But who? And why did everyone gasp in disbelief? Bruno had never known anything but loyalty. From the moment he was chosen as a K9 officer, he had dedicated his life to protecting and serving alongside his partner, Officer Mark Reynolds. Together, they had faced danger head-on, tracking down criminals, saving lives, and forming an unbreakable bond. Bruno was not just any German Shepherd, he was exceptional. His sharp instincts and unwavering dedication had saved Mark's life more times than he could count. Whether it was a high-speed chase or a dangerous raid, Bruno was always there, standing firm like a guardian angel. But no amount of training could prepare Bruno for the one thing he feared the most: separation from the man he considered his family. When Bruno retired due to age and declining health, Mark had no choice but to leave him at a shelter temporarily. It was a difficult decision, but Mark was going through personal struggles, an unexpected transfer to another state, financial instability, and personal losses. He had promised to come back for Bruno once things settled. Bruno had waited. Days turned into weeks. Weeks stretched into months. And then, the months became years. At first, he would sit near the shelter gate, ears perked, waiting for Mark's familiar scent. Every time the door opened, he would lift his head, expecting to see the only human he ever trusted. But disappointment followed, time and time again. The shelter staff did their best to comfort him, but nothing could replace the love he had for his owner. Then, his health started to decline. Age had caught up with him, and so had loneliness. His once strong legs weakened, making it difficult to stand. His appetite faded, and the spark in his eyes dimmed. The other dogs at the shelter barked and played, but Bruno only curled up in a corner, his heart heavy with sadness. The shelter's vet did everything possible, giving him medicine, special food, and extra care. But nothing could heal a broken heart. And then, one evening, Bruno collapsed. The staff rushed to his side, gently stroking his fur. His breathing was shallow, his body cold. It was clear he did not have much time left. But Bruno was not ready to go. As if summoning the last of his strength, he lifted his head and howled. It was a deep, sorrowful sound that echoed through the shelter. The other dogs fell silent. The workers stood frozen, feeling the weight of his pain. Bruno was calling for someone. He was calling for Mark. The staff scrambled to find a way to contact him. They searched through old records, tried outdated phone numbers, and even reached out to law enforcement agencies. But there was no trace of Mark Reynolds. Had he moved away? Had something happened to him? As the hours passed, Bruno continued his heartbreaking cries, his frail body trembling. It was as if he refused to let go until he saw his owner one last time. The shelter staff knew they had to do something. One of the workers, Sarah, took a photo of Bruno, his tired eyes filled with longing, and posted it online, sharing his story. The caption read, "Bruno, a retired K9, is taking his last breaths. He is calling for his owner, Officer Mark Reynolds. If anyone knows him, please help us reunite them before it is too late." The post went viral within hours. Thousands of people shared it, hoping to find Mark. Comments flooded in, people expressing their heartbreak, others offering to adopt Bruno. But there was no news of his owner. Bruno's breathing slowed, his howls grew weaker. The shelter workers sat by his side, whispering words of comfort. Then, just when hope seemed lost, the shelter's front door creaked open. Bruno's ears twitched. A familiar scent filled the air. And then, footsteps, slow, hesitant, almost disbelieving. A voice broke the silence. "Bruno?" Bruno's tired eyes widened. His body trembled, but this time, not from weakness, from recognition. It was him. It was Mark. Tears streamed down the officer's face as he rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside his beloved partner. "I am here, buddy. I am so sorry." Bruno let out a soft whimper, pressing his head against Mark's chest, feeling the warmth he had missed for so long. His tail, motionless for weeks, gave the faintest wag. The entire shelter watched in stunned silence, some with tears in their eyes. Mark held Bruno close, his voice breaking. "I thought I lost you. I looked for you everywhere." Through sobs, he explained how life had taken an unexpected turn. Losing his job, moving to another state, and not knowing where Bruno had ended up. He had searched, but with no success. When he saw the viral post, he had driven through the night without stopping. Bruno let out a deep sigh, his body finally relaxing. He had held on for this moment. He had waited for his best friend. Mark stayed by Bruno's side, whispering stories of their old adventures, telling him how much he loved him. Bruno listened, his breathing slowing. And then, with one final breath, he closed his eyes, at peace, knowing he was never truly forgotten. The shelter fell silent. Mark sobbed, holding on to his best friend, as the world mourned the loss of a true hero. But Bruno did not die alone. He died in the arms of the man he had loved the most. And in that moment, the whole world understood. Dogs do not just love us, they wait for us. Forever. Then, something unbelievable happened. The door to the shelter creaked open, breaking the thick silence that had enveloped the room. A gust of cold air swept in, but it wasn't just the chill that made Bruno's heart race. The familiar scent, the one he had longed for all these years, lingered in the air. It was faint but unmistakable. Mark. Bruno's ears twitched. His body, frail and weak, seemed to stir with life once more. His cloudy eyes, which had grown dull over time, suddenly widened. A spark of recognition flickered deep within them. His tail, which had been motionless for weeks, gave a tentative twitch. The shelter workers, who had been quietly observing Bruno's painful decline, exchanged confused glances. What was happening? But Bruno didn't care about the confusion. He had been waiting for this moment. He had waited for so long. He could feel it in his bones, the moment he had been hoping for, praying for. He could feel Mark. The shelter workers stood frozen, not daring to interrupt what felt like a sacred moment. Then, slowly, as though unsure of what was real, Bruno lifted his head. His breathing was labored, but there was a sense of urgency in the way he raised himself from his resting position. His paws, weak from age and sickness, trembled slightly as he forced his body to move toward the door. The movement was slow, deliberate, each step heavier than the last. But he couldn't stop now. He had to see him. And then, there he was. Mark stood in the doorway, his face pale and exhausted, but filled with an overwhelming relief. His eyes were red from tears, but his lips trembled with emotion as he laid eyes on his partner for the first time in years. "Bruno?" Mark whispered hoarsely, as if doubting his own eyes. Bruno's heart skipped a beat. That voice. He recognized it instantly. It was the voice that had called his name 1,000 times during their adventures. The voice that had comforted him during storms. The voice that had given him a sense of purpose. Bruno's legs wobbled, but he kept going. With every ounce of strength he had left, he staggered forward, his paws dragging across the cold floor. The shelter workers gasped as they watched the old dog move, amazed by the determination in his eyes. It was as if he had been given a second wind, fueled by the sheer force of his love for his owner. Mark dropped to his knees as Bruno closed the distance between them. The tears that had been threatening to fall now streamed freely down Mark's face. His hands reached out, trembling, as he gently cupped Bruno's face. "I'm so sorry, buddy. I should have been here sooner. I never meant to leave you." His voice cracked with grief, and he kissed Bruno's forehead, his own heart breaking at the sight of his once strong and proud K9, now weak and frail. Bruno, in all his weariness, nuzzled Mark's chest, pushing his nose into the familiar scent that he had been waiting for all these years. His body, although frail and worn, seemed to come alive at the touch of his owner. The room was silent except for the soft sound of Mark's sobs and Bruno's weak, labored breathing. The shelter workers were still, too moved by the reunion to speak. It felt as if the entire world had stopped for a moment. Bruno had held on for this. He had waited, each day a struggle, each breath a battle, just to be with the man he loved. He had spent years lying in the dark, lonely corner of the shelter, wondering if his owner had forgotten him. And now, the one thing he needed most in the world, his best friend, his hero, was finally here. Bruno's tail, barely visible under the weight of age, gave a faint but genuine wag. It was small, weak, but it was enough to fill Mark's heart with an overwhelming flood of love and sorrow. "I never forgot you, Bruno. I searched for you. I thought I had lost you forever," Mark choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you, boy. I love you so much." Bruno's eyes, though clouded by age, met Mark's with a look of understanding. He had known this day would come. He had believed, deep in his heart, that Mark would come back for him. Bruno had waited for this moment. He had endured the pain, the loneliness, just to be here with his owner. even if only for a few moments more. Mark gently stroked Bruno's fur, his hands shaking as he held onto the dog that had been his partner, his friend, and his family. Bruno leaned into the touch, pressing himself against Mark's chest as if to say, "I am here. I've been waiting for you. I've always been waiting for you." The shelter workers were still watching, some of them unable to hold back tears. It wasn't just Bruno's reunion with Mark that moved them. It was the sheer love and loyalty that this dog had shown. Bruno had given everything for his owner. He had given his best years, his strength, his unwavering loyalty. And in return, he had received nothing but the hope that one day Mark would return. And now, Mark had returned. But was it too late? Bruno's breathing had become more erratic, his body no longer able to keep up with his desire to stay close to Mark. His body was giving out, but his spirit refused to let go. Mark held Bruno tighter, his own sobs filling the space between them. "Don't go, Bruno. Please don't go. Stay with me." But Bruno's time was running out. He had fought so hard to stay alive, to hold on for just this moment. And now he could feel the last of his strength ebbing away. But he wasn't afraid. He wasn't sad. He had everything he needed in that moment. With one final sigh, Bruno's body relaxed, and his breathing slowed. Mark's heart stopped. He held Bruno close, his face buried in the dog's fur, as he whispered, "I love you, buddy. Thank you for everything." Bruno gave one last weak wag of his tail before he finally succumbed to the peace he had longed for. He had been reunited with the one person he had loved above all else. The shelter was silent again. The workers stood motionless, unable to speak, as Mark gently laid Bruno's head on his lap. His tears continued to flow, but they were no longer tears of regret or sorrow. They were tears of gratitude. Bruno had waited for him, had stayed strong, just for this moment. And now he could finally rest. The door to the shelter was still open, and a soft breeze fluttered in, carrying the scent of the outside world. For a brief moment, it felt as though the whole world was honoring Bruno's final moments. His loyalty had been rewarded, and he had left this world knowing that the love he had given would never be forgotten. Mark remained kneeling beside his old partner, holding him close, unwilling to let go. And in that quiet, sacred space, Bruno's story ended. But his love, his loyalty, would live on in Mark's heart forever. The air in the shelter grew heavier with every passing moment. The workers stood still, unsure of what to do next. Mark held Bruno close, the tears in his eyes now flowing freely as the dog's frail body lay limp in his arms. There was no more movement, no more sounds. Only the faintest trace of Bruno's breath lingered in the silence. As the minutes passed, the weight of the situation began to settle on everyone present. Mark could feel the finality of Bruno's passing, and though he had been prepared for this moment, it still hurt, more than he could ever have imagined. His heart, heavy with grief, seemed to shatter with every beat. He had waited too long to reunite with his partner, and now it was too late. But then something unexpected happened. The door to the shelter opened once again. A soft breeze swept into the room, but this time, the scent that filled the air wasn't just that of the outdoors. It was someone else's. Someone unfamiliar, but somehow important. Mark looked up, startled. He was too deep in his sorrow to focus on anything other than the dog in his arms. But the sound of footsteps drew his attention away. A figure stood at the entrance, pausing as if unsure of what to do. It was a man, maybe in his mid-30s, with a solemn expression. His eyes, though distant, held a look of recognition, like he had come searching for something or someone. Mark's eyes narrowed. There was something about this man that felt significant, as if the universe had brought him here for a reason. The stranger took a few cautious steps inside the shelter, glancing around at the other workers before his eyes finally landed on Mark, and then on Bruno's lifeless form. The stranger's face paled. His lips parted as if trying to find the right words, but none came. The room fell into an eerie silence once again. Mark looked at the man, confused. "Do I know you?" The stranger swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. I think you know me." He took another step closer, his gaze shifting from Mark to Bruno and back again. Mark blinked, feeling a strange chill crawl up his spine. "Who are you?" The stranger hesitated, then slowly extended a hand toward the dog, though he did not touch him. His eyes were filled with emotion, and his voice cracked as he spoke. I'm Alex. Mark. I'm Alex's son." A flood of memories rushed through Mark's mind. The name Alex was familiar, but not in the way he had expected. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He remembered the man from years ago, the younger officer who had worked alongside him and Bruno when he first joined the force. But how could this be? Alex had left the force many years ago after a tragic accident left him with serious injuries. He had gone off the grid, choosing a life away from everything that reminded him of the pain. At the time, Mark had been devastated by the loss of a promising partner, but there had been no way to contact him after his departure. I don't understand," Mark's voice faltered. "You're his son?" Alex nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Bruno. "Yes, I am. I didn't even know Bruno was here. I only found out when I saw the post online. When I read about the K9 who had been waiting for his owner, I knew I had to come." He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady his emotions. Bruno was my father's partner. They were closer than any human and dog could be. And my father died 2 years ago, Mark. I couldn't take care of him. I couldn't be the partner he needed. But he was still waiting for you. He never gave up on you. Mark's heart skipped a beat. The realization hit him harder than any blow he had ever received. All this time, he had thought that Bruno was waiting for him. And yet, Bruno had also been waiting for Alex. For his son. Alex stepped closer to Bruno, his eyes softening as he knelt down beside him. He reached out a tentative hand and gently stroked the old dog's fur. A single tear slid down his cheek as he whispered, "I'm so sorry, old friend. I should have been here. I shouldn't have left you to wait all alone." Mark stood frozen, the truth settling in like a heavy weight on his chest. All these years, he had thought he had been the one Bruno was waiting for, but the truth was far more complicated. Bruno had been loyal not just to Mark, but to Alex as well. The two men sat in silence, side by side, with Bruno between them. A quiet understanding passed between them, and for the first time in years, Mark felt like he could breathe again. He had come here with the expectation of finding closure, of finally making peace with the years lost. But now, as Alex sat beside him, he realized something far more important. That there was no need for closure. There was only love, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a dog and its owner. Mark reached out and placed a hand on Alex's shoulder. I didn't know. I didn't know he was waiting for you too." Alex nodded, his eyes filled with regret and grief. "We both failed him in different ways, Mark. But in the end, he waited for us both. He never stopped loving us, no matter how long we were gone." The silence between them stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence born from understanding, from the recognition of the shared love they both had for this incredible dog. After a long moment, Mark finally spoke, his voice steady and calm, despite the pain that lingered in his chest. "Bruno never stopped believing in us. He never gave up. And I guess that's what love is, right?" Alex looked up at him, his eyes filled with a new sense of understanding. "It is," he replied softly. "Love isn't just about being there when things are easy. It's about sticking around when it's hard. Even when the world forgets you, even when you're left alone, you keep believing in the people you love. That's what Bruno did." Mark nodded. He finally understood. Bruno had given everything, his loyalty, his strength, and his love. He had waited for years for something that he knew deep down was never guaranteed. He had waited because he believed. He had believed that his owners, Mark and Alex, would find their way back to him, no matter how long it took. And now, as the two men sat together, each feeling the weight of their own regrets, they realized that Bruno had given them the greatest gift of all, the understanding of what true loyalty really meant. The dog who had served them both with unparalleled devotion had taught them a lesson that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Love was about sacrifice. It was about never giving up, even when the road was long and difficult. It was about being there for each other, no matter the distance or the time apart. And in that moment, as the shelter workers watched quietly, Mark and Alex made a silent promise to honor Bruno's memory. They would not let his loyalty go in vain. They would carry it with them, in their hearts, forever. Bruno's life had ended, but his legacy lived on through the love he had shown. The bond between a dog and its owner was not just about the moments they shared. It was about the trust, the sacrifice, and the love that endured beyond even death. Bruno had been waiting, and in the end, he had brought two lost souls back together, and that, in itself, was the greatest gift of all. Bruno's story is a powerful reminder that love never fades, no matter how much time passes. His unwavering loyalty to both Mark and Alex is a testament to the incredible bond between a dog and its owner. If this touching story has warmed your heart, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and any similar stories you may have about the animals who have touched your life. Do not forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this heartwarming story. Share it with your friends and family to spread the love and remind everyone of the power of unconditional loyalty. And if you want to hear more incredible animal stories like this one, be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Thank you for watching, and remember, love, loyalty, and the bond between animals and their owners are truly forever. See you in the next story.